All right, welcome to the A's Philosophy YouTube channel. I am A's Philosophy, and tonight we're going to try and get a little bit of a discussion going. Uh, Tonight I'm going to talk about something a little bit, excuse tonight where I am, I guess, and where you are. But in this stream, I'm going to be talking about. I usually don't talk about politics, but I do think it's very important. I think everyone needs to pay attention to what's going on. Um, with the people who are running the country, the culture around us, and all of that. These are all very important things. In this channel, I try to promote what I believe is the true vision of Christianity. And I do think that as Christians, Christians are supposed to be focused on making the world a better place because that's what Christ taught. A lot of Christianity today is just about believing some doctrines and believing some creeds. You know, you have to believe that Jesus is God. You have to believe that He died for your sins. But that's the kind of modern fake version of Christianity. The real Christianity is a way of life that's aimed at improving the human condition. And it's not that the churches don't teach that. It's just that it's kind of buried underneath all of the nonsense that they peddle in the churches these days. They really should be teaching people that their ultimate goal is to first improve themselves and second improve society, which often follows as a result of improving yourself and just basically being beholden to truth and righteousness and things like that. And part of improving this world is making sure that society around us is operating in a way that best promotes harmony, peace, prosperity, and things like that. Now, right now, as we live in the United States, and probably other places too, but I want to focus on the United States. There's a lot of chaos going on, and it's a lot of smoke, a lot of confusion about who's right, who's wrong. Basically, we're a deeply divided country. Both sides, I think we're reaching a point where basically both sides view the other as just a mortal enemy, and it's kind of hard to figure out how to resolve all this. But I do want to attempt to basically speak about this a little bit. A big question is about, Trump and, is he evil? Is he good? Is he doing the right thing? A lot of Americans have been convinced that he's just this evil guy up there, just basically being a dictator and just slaughtering his enemies and going after them. And I guess I never really finished saying that as Christians, we really do need to make sure that the people running the country are doing the right thing. If you don't care about the people running the government who are making decisions that are affecting, everyone in society, then you really don't love your neighbor. You don't love your neighbor if you don't think about the laws that are being made and how they're impacting your fellow citizens and how people's lives are being affected. Loving your neighbor, if somebody's up there passing laws or engaging in corruption and you're okay with that or you don't care about it, then I'm sorry, you're just not a loving person and you're violating Christ's commandment. So I do think being engaged in politics, or at least being aware of what's going on, is part of Christianity. It is part of the responsibility of a Christian to make sure that the people leading our society are doing the right thing. And if you're allowing people to be elected or basically run things who are doing the wrong thing or being corrupt, then you're basically not following Christ properly, in my opinion. I know that's probably controversial to some people, but for me, it's just common sense. You can't claim to be, loving and caring about your fellow humans and then watching them get basically harmed by their own government, or whether your own government or internationally. There's a lot of other governments out there that are way worse than the United States. And I'm not saying the United States is bad. I'm just saying that if you look around the world and see all these actual dictatorships, because Trump is not a dictator, but you see all these other people like this guy in Iran, the Ayatollah, just slaughtering. These people out there protesting Trump as being a fascist. They don't know what real fascism is. They don't know what real authoritarianism is. Over in Iran, tens of thousands of people just got murdered by their own government because he is a real dictator, a real authoritarian. And you're hardly hearing anything about that. really hardly hear anything about the fact that just over the last few weeks, some people are saying it probably as tens of thousands of people were murdered by their own government in just one country for protesting for freedom. And you have people in the United States going mad because Trump's trying to deport illegals in this country. And I do want to talk about that because the immigration issue is becoming a source of very deep division in this country. And I want to kind of speak to that and just share some thoughts. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share screen and just kind of go over some things that have happened in the last couple of days. If you're paying any attention at all, you're probably aware of some of what I'm going to say, but let's see if we can get some clarity on this. Now, we have this going on in Minneapolis. Oh, by the way, I should show my posts because I think it's important that people be aware of where I'm starting from. So basically, if you're paying attention, you know that there are these big protests going on about this. A second person was basically killed during a confrontation with ICE officers in Minneapolis. This is the second person in the last week or so who's been killed in an ICE-related shooting. And this is my thoughts on what's going on. There are people out there protesting in Minneapolis about what's happening. This is my take on what's going on. And I had this on my community post. The people raging and protesting about ICE-related killings are the same people who cheered the fact that Charlie Kirk got assassinated for simply expressing his beliefs in public. Every year, thousands of Americans are victimized and murdered by the violent illegal immigrants the Democrats have allowed into the country over time, so that they can eventually pad their voter rolls after making them citizens. There is a reason this year saw the biggest drop in murders in over a century. The media won't admit it's because of Trump deporting all of these violent people from our society who shouldn't have been here in the first place. Sorry, I'm not buying their selective outrage. They are ignorant hypocrites who operate with a disgusting double standard. And, it's got objective ethics, and Mike is in the chat. I don't think people understand ICE can do everything regular cops can't. Profile your skin, clothing, job, roofing, landscape, accent, English, conversion. That's where the crux is. I'm not sure they're actually even doing that. I'm not sure they're profiling people racially. Well, let me edit this. There's a typo in there. I don't like when there are typos. I already corrected one. The media, there we go. So let's just kind of review here. So we have the CBS. So this is, considered a valid news source. It's really not. It's really very heavily biased in terms of liberal, kind of elitist, leftist ideology. It doesn't really report the things that kind of hurt the Democrat Party. But anyways, we'll use it just because they got something. Thousands marched through downtown Minneapolis protesting against ICE as state workers hold general strike. So I'm not going to read the whole article, but basically there are a bunch of people in Minneapolis. We can see let's see if I can't zoom in. We see all these people, thousands of people protesting in the street. This is from basically Friday, which is after the ICE-related shooting. I just want to show you what's going on. Another story from CBS, the same news story. This is from the day before, January 22nd, 2020. So just look at this, folks. Look at this headline. Murders plummeted more than 20% in the U.S. in the last year. The largest drop on record, study shows. Murders plummeted more than 20% in the U.S. last year. The largest drop on record. How far back does the record go? Let's go back to 1900. That's over 125 years. So let's ask: is this a coincidence? Is it a coincidence that the year Trump gets elected, the first year Trump gets elected, the United States sees the single largest drop in murder rate in the history of this country? Is that something? Is that a question? Now, I'm going to read. I haven't actually read the. So they're asking why did this happen? Richmond, Virginia dropped 59%. Los Angeles Why is this happening? So let's see if CBS can get it right. Oh, here we go. A group of criminal justice experts convened by a CCJ had varied answers as to what caused such a precipitous drop in homicides, but they were generally in agreement that the stabilization of routines, an influx of COVID-19 relief funds, and program innovation were strong drivers. Many cities focused enforcement and prevention on the small number of neighborhoods and groups driving a large share of shootings. So the article ends here, and guess what they don't mention? They don't mention what I just did. They don't mention what I just said about Trump. This somehow it's just a strange coincidence that the year Trump gets elected, I guess the second time, but the first year Trump gets elected in his second term, there's this massive drop in crime. So then they're asking, what happened? What happened? Now, people, it's pretty obvious what's going on. The reason there's a gigantic murder rates in the United States is because of Trump. Trump has saved countless lives because of his policies, because of his hard on crime policies, and more importantly, his immigration policies. Trump is deporting is basically what he's doing in cities like Minneapolis, and not just Minneapolis, but all over the country, is the Democrats operate what are called sanctuary cities. Sanctuary cities is a term for cities in the United States where the Democrats basically do not enforce or cooperate with national immigration laws or national immigration enforcement agencies such as ICE. So what happens is all of the, or not all of them, but vast numbers of illegal immigrants gather in these places because they don't have to worry about basically being removed from the country as much as they would in somewhere else. So Democrats are creating safe havens for illegal immigrants of all types. And as Trump has correctly pointed out in a number of his speeches, a lot of people, not all of them, but a lot of people coming in this country are people who have violent histories, violent crime records, who are being freed in their home countries and sent in caravans to the United States. So our country, during the Biden years, was being flooded with these violent people crossing the border and then spread into the United States. And where were they all going? Mostly to these Democrat-led sanctuary cities. So what Trump has done since he's been elected in his first year is he has begun to basically create a process for going into these Democrat cities and removing these people. And by the way, anyone in this country illegally, according to federal immigration law, is subject to deportation. So if you're in this country illegally, you're supposed to be deported. The Democrats are trying to create this narrative. We should only be deporting the ones that are violent. According to the U.S. law, see, what they do is they call Trump lawless. They call Trump, someone who just flouts the law. No, they're the ones who are defying the law. The law says if you're in this country illegally, you should be deported. The Democrats don't believe that. Because why? Because if you look at these statistics of basically the Democrat political strategy is to basically use socialism and welfare to buy votes to basically fund their power. Okay, that's how they operate. They use socialism and welfare distribution as a means of winning elections. It's very easy to win an election when you promise, corrupt, greedy people free stuff. And I don't buy this myth that only the rich people are evil. No, poor people are just as evil and corrupt as rich people. We're all, it's all basically statistically the same. A lot of the reason actually people are poor is because of their own life choices and making bad choices financially and otherwise. And basically when you do that, a lot of them just don't have a problem with voting for people who say, I'm going to steal from somebody else and give it to you. So that's a Democrat playbook. And unfortunately, if you look at the statistics of who's on welfare and all these programs the Democrats create, a lot of the immigrants are vastly over proportionately represented on these welfare rolls of various types. And they say, oh, immigrants aren't allowed to use. Yes, they are. Yes, they are. Immigrants are absolutely on welfare. we've learned from these investigations in Minnesota and elsewhere, they have all these different ways of gaming the system and getting access to the welfare funds and getting free healthcare and getting free student tuition. If they have children, the children, can legally basically collect the welfare payments and things like that. There are some immigrant communities where over 80 to 90% of the immigrants are on welfare. So what does that mean? That means they're basically loyal Democrat voters because they're dependent on the government for their well-being. A lot of them are surviving off of the money that the so-called free money that they're given by the Democrats to basically eat and live and do whatever it is they're doing. So the Democrats want to turn them into citizens to make sure that they can vote legally and basically just create an endless, election victories for the Democrats. That's the ultimate end game that's going on here. So the Democrats, all that matters to them is that these immigrants come into the country, sweep in, go to where the Democrats want to win elections and stay there. It doesn't matter if they're violent, not violent, whatever the case may be. The Democrats, the numbers game is the more immigrants in the country, they're going to one, maybe even more than that, maybe 5 to 1, 6 to 1, 7 to 1. They're going to vote Democrat as opposed to Republican. Maybe 10 to 1, maybe more than that statistically. So the Democrats allow these immigrants into the country illegally, illegal immigrants, and a lot of them are violent, and a lot of them are committing all kinds of crimes, including murder. And this all ties back to what's going on right here. Murders plummeted in the United States by more than 20% last year, the largest drop on record. So Trump is going into these Democrat-run cities, and basically the Democrats are enraged because he's deporting their voter base. Now, they're not going to put it like that, but this is what needs to be understood. Another thing that needs to be understood, there's a lawsuit. We won't go into the lawsuit, Arizona versus United States. I'm just going to summarize it for you. I have basically a legal summary of what happened. Back in 2010, maybe a lot of people don't realize this. Let's see here. Let's got some comments. Yeah, we know that free money isn't enough, as with any legal system, yet struggles. Yeah, it's never enough because basically how well you do with money isn't dependent on how much you have. It's based on your own spending practices. So the more they get, the more they spend. We got Robin Hood in the chat. Good to see you here. Who do you think was running the show in those Biden years? Surely it wasn't him. Yeah, it wasn't Biden. It wasn't Biden. He was too brain dead to know. He couldn't put his own pants on for most of the time. So Biden was clearly just a puppet for whoever was running the show behind the scenes. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Okay, let's see here. Just like any cops, they can't come to my house without a warrant. I'm not saying they should. Yeah, I don't think anyone should be going into anyone's house without a warrant, for sure. But this case, the Arizona versus the United States, I'm not going to go into this too deep, but back in 2010, when Obama was actually probably in 2012, actually, back when Obama was president, Arizona passed a law that said that, or basically had a number of stipulations, but basically Arizona wanted to, the Obama administration, the Democrats have had this plan of about flooding America with legal immigrants for a long, long time, who basically boost their voter rolls. Now, Arizona in 2010 passed a law that's because the Obama administration wasn't enforcing the border. Arizona passed the laws that the United States already had, but all it said was that Arizona, the state, is going to enforce these laws. And here, I'll actually read this because it's actually interesting history. It's good for people to know this. The state of Arizona passed a state immigration law in 2010 responding to the problem of illegal immigration in the state. The United States Department of Justice, directed by Barack Obama, sued Arizona to basically stop this law. The federal court enjoined, which means stop, 4 provisions of the act. There were 4 provisions. The provisions were this: made it a crime to be unlawfully present in the United States. Authorized warrantless arrest of people based on suspicion of being illegally in the United States. and require state and local officers to check the citizenship of people they have arrested. So basically, all of these things are required to enforce immigration laws, but the federal government was not doing this. So Arizona passed a law that says we're going to do it. We're going to pay the bill. We're going to do it. The United States under Obama, the Department of Justice sued Arizona and basically won. And what the court ruled is that the federal government has full authority to basically enforce immigration law. The states cannot enforce immigration. That's what was decided. So a state cannot try to pass state. Here it is. A state. This is the legal. What happened is that a state cannot try to pass state immigration laws that are preempted by or run in conflict with federal immigration law because the federal government possesses the ultimate authority over immigration law and policy. So that's what the courts decided. They said, even though the law in Arizona is exactly what the federal law is, the courts ruled that Arizona could not enforce immigration laws because the federal government has jurisdiction over immigration. This is what happened. And this was a result of a Democrat presidency creating this effect. So now that we see that the Republican president is in charge, the Democrats want to reverse that. They want to say, no, you cannot, we do not want the federal government to enforce these laws. Well, guess what? This is because they're hypocrites. They're lawless hypocrites. And their power is being threatened by the enforcement of our immigration laws. So this is what's going on. But I want to show what's going on. All these people right here. Where was it? I missed it. I missed it. Where'd it go? All these people who I was just showing protesting ICE. This is what they're protecting. They're protecting murderers. They're protecting people who violently assault women. They're protecting the people who are in the United States illegally committing violent crimes of all types against American citizens because they've been brainwashed to believe basically a bunch of progressive liberal nonsense about how if you don't basically allow all of these people to come into our country one way or another, then we're basically Nazi Germany. So the Democrats put it in schools, put it in the media, put it wherever that, the worst thing you can do is basically be one of these racist Nazis who doesn't believe in mass immigration. And I think actually part of it also is the people protesting know they're leftists, they're liberals. They know that these immigrants are part of the power structure that's being constructed on the left. And they want the media to say they don't really care about the immigrants, really, at the end of the day, because I can just give you an example. There were many reports about how these people were being trafficked across the border, and the women and the children were just being sexually assaulted just on an unbelievable scale, an atrocious scale. They were finding all kinds of, unfortunately, dead bodies all along the trails that these immigrants use to come in the United States. And these people were dying. They were trafficked by drug cartels. They were being the women were being assaulted by the drug traffickers. And the leftists and liberals who loved mass immigration never complained about any of that because I think it's part of the moral corruption of them. They just see these people as political pawns. And if they suffer, it doesn't really matter. So I'm not going to sit here and think that these people actually care about the immigrants. It's a political power that comes from them. And this is the result, is that within 1 year under Trump, murders plummet more than any other year over year in the history of the country because of what Trump has done. Now, the media is not going to report that and admit it was Trump, but it really is. This is just not some strange coincidence. So we have to ask ourselves, how many people would have died if Kamala had been elected? It's clearly a lot of people. This wouldn't have happened if Kamala had been elected. This plummet, no, it would have gotten worse because the problem is the violent illegal immigrants in the country that Trump's getting rid of. So everyone who voted for Kamala would have the blood of these murdered people on their hands. Now, they could say it's, probably justified because Kamala was going to do good stuff in other ways, but I can guarantee you that she would not have done what Trump is doing, which is deport all these violent criminals, because the Democrats are the ones protecting them. The Democrats are the ones creating the sanctuary cities that allow these violent criminal illegal aliens to operate freely without fear of being basically challenged by law enforcement authorities. So I just want to put this out there. Trump has saved a lot of lives. There's no doubt about it. How many lives? A lot. And the people protesting against Trump are protesting against him saving lives by doing what he's doing. They are trying to keep the system in place that allows all these violent people to remain in the United States. And I've seen videos of people protesting ICE stations, and the ICE agents are literally talking to them saying, "We have a warrant for a man who is a rapist pedophile. We are trying to go arrest him, and you are literally obstructing our path." And these usually white liberal savior complex white guilt types are sitting there with their smug attitude protecting violent rapists, murderers in our communities because they have been brainwashed into this insane ideology. This is what's going on with the left. So I have no sympathy for these protesters whatsoever because they're insane and because basically the facts are out there that what Trump is doing is having a tremendous positive impact and it's saving people's lives. And if they don't like that, then they're sick, they're evil, and they're wrong. And I'm not gonna play their game. The enforcement of our immigration laws must go on. Trump must continue to deport these people who are in the country illegally. None of them should be here in the first place, but they're protecting even the violent ones. There's something else here. By the way, people, I'm in this snowstorm. I might lose power at any minute. I just want to put that out there. One more thing. Let's see if I can find it. Now, here's another one just going on. So Abigail Spanberger was just elected the governor of Virginia. She's a Democrat. She won the election in Virginia last year. That was held last year. And now she just took over a couple of days ago. The first thing she did as governor was ended the relationship between ICE and Virginia State Police. So ICE is the federal agency that enforces immigration. And there had been a law or an order from the governor that the Virginia State Police must coordinate with ICE whenever a criminal illegal immigrant is arrested in Virginia. And so what is the end result of this? The end result of this is that, once again, what this results in is the protection. What the state police were doing, and this has happened in other states, so this is just Virginia, but it could be applied to a number of other Democrat-led states. The police in Virginia, when they release or are holding people who have been arrested in this country, in the state of Virginia, who have committed crimes against Virginians, the state police were doing under the previous Republican governor was alerting ICE to the fact that this has happened and that they're holding an illegal immigrant who has committed a crime, and they can come and take this individual and do whatever it is that ICE is going to do, which is usually deport the person. So let's just get this straight. What Abigail Spanberger did as her first act as governor is protect criminal illegal immigrants who have committed crimes against Virginia's state citizens by ending the relationship between the Virginia State Police and ICE. So what is going to happen as a result of this? Criminal illegal aliens are going to be able to operate more freely in the state of Virginia, and they are going to be able to do more crimes and do more to hurt the people of Virginia because of what Abigail Spanberger is doing. That was the first thing she did, was protect violent, criminal, illegal immigrants and make sure that the state police would not uh, report the capture of these individuals to ICE. Why are the Democrats protecting criminal illegal immigrants who are victimizing American citizens? What is the logic behind this? Now, these are politicians. The answer is they're basically protecting their own political power. The criminal illegal immigrants are basically seen as future, not just the criminal, but all of the illegal immigrants are basically seen largely as future Democrat voters if they can gain citizenship. So the fact that they are victimizing and committing criminal acts against citizens is secondary in the Democrats' mind to the fact that eventually we can get these people voting for us. So people in Virginia are going to be hurt by this. They're going to be hurt by this. People are going to get hurt by what Spanberger did and she's doing other pretty wacky things, but just kind of one thing that she's done, which is kind of related to what I've already been discussing. So yeah, I feel sorry for the people who are, I can almost guarantee you that some people are going to die as a result of this. How many? I don't know. Some people are going to have their property stolen. Some people are going to be harmed in other ways. Some people are going to be defrauded, like we see in some of these immigrants defrauding the welfare system all over in Minnesota and elsewhere. This is what the Democrats are doing. They're passing laws, doing things that protect violent criminals in our country because of their political power. That's exactly what's happening. And the reason they're so angry is because what Trump is doing is threatening their political power. They don't actually care about these immigrants, as I've already explained, as human beings. They care about them only as so far as they expand and protect their political fortunes. All right. But just remember, what Trump is doing, this isn't something that you can deny. Trump is saving lives by doing what he's doing. All right. There's no question. All right, I might have missed some comments. I can review. Biden is still more conscious than Trump has ever been. No, Biden has severe dementia. He's totally anyone who thinks that Trump is Biden is more aware than Trump is just basically ignoring reality. AI overview. ICE agents operate on a different, generally broader authority regarding immigration violations compared to local police. They are still bound by Fourth Amendment. Okay. They generally require a warrant signed by a judge to enter a home. They often use administrative warrants not signed by a judge and cannot legally enter without consent. Thank you, Mike. Not at all. A's is definitely on the other side. I have friends on both sides. I prefer to be in the middle. Okay, that's a good way to be. ICE agents often use administrative warrants, forms I-20 or I-205, which are signed by an ICE supervisor, not a judge. These do not grant legal authority to enter a home without consent. Man, more facts being spit by Mike. Biden maybe still be conscious, but coherent and capable. Nah, yeah, you're right. It's sad. I'm not trying to make fun of him. He just, dementia is not something I would wish on anybody, but it's just the facts. Like, some people have it and he does. It's just the way it is. I don't want him to have it. I don't want him to suffer or his family to suffer, but we just have to be, we have to believe what's true. And that's true about Biden. They're totally blind to anything positive. Yeah, Trump's doing a lot of good things. That's why he's been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize by like 8 different countries. He's doing all these great things for this world. And you have brainwashed leftists and liberals in this country who think he's literally the second coming of Hitler. And it's sad. It's sad because they claim that the right is the one that's living in a cult, but look at the reality in which they live. They're actually going out and protesting against violent illegal immigrants being removed from the country. And I assume that they don't want the law-abiding illegal immigrants to the extent that that's true to be deported either. But the fact is, like, if I go to another country, every country enforces their borders, usually a lot stricter than the United States. Like, try to enter Mexico illegally. It's not going to go well for you, or Canada, or try China. They'll just literally shoot you on the spot, or some of these countries over there. There's a lot of countries that'll just kill you for going in the country illegally. So the fact that they think that enforcing immigration laws is somehow racist or unethical just shows that, well, I guess every other country is unethical, so why not us? Yeah, Kamala was. So, anyways, I wanted to put that out there just because I think this is important that this be discussed. That the narrative around Trump and his immigration policies is that he's just being a dictator, a tyrant. He's just going out there and just terrorizing communities of people he doesn't like. It's not true. He's actually, the facts are he's saving countless lives, probably thousands of lives, really, and not just saving lives, but a lot of other types of crimes that are being committed by these people. Most of the immigrant families are on welfare. You can look at those statistics yourself. So I've seen as high as 70, 80%. So why don't the liberals and leftists pick up the tab? If they love the immigrants so much, I'd like to see them, why should the American taxpayer foot the bill for the living expenses of these immigrants? If the liberals love them so much, the Democrats start a charity. Start a charity. Start a charity to pay for the life. Don't put it on the backs of the American taxpayers. Why are United States citizens, taxpayers, going to fund this massive amount of money that's being thrown at illegal immigrants in this country? A righteous person would say, that's not just, that's not fair. But these liberals, for whatever reason, don't seem to have a problem with making all these people who go to work every day. Well, they rationalize it. Oh, the billionaires are paying. No, it's, when I actually have a full-time job, but when I see the amount of money that's taken out of my paycheck and goes to the government, it makes me sick to know that so much of it is basically going to, basically a lot of things I don't even believe in, but also a lot of it's going to people who are in this country illegally and just don't want to work and don't deserve it. And I, worked really hard for it. And these liberals are out there protesting. They don't, they're not going to pay for it. Do they have jobs? And if they do if they want to pay for illegals, I would love to see them create a liberal fund for illegal immigrants. And I might not have as big a problem with legal immigration if they did that. If all the liberals and all the rich Hollywood snob elites got together and decided to pay for the housing and stuff of illegal immigrants that they love so much, but that's not the case. They're not doing that. They're making everyone else go to work every day and pay literally billions and billions of dollars every year to fund these immigrants coming into the country. So they're fine using the government to steal people's money and pay for the things that they think are important. And if you protest, you're a racist. If that's kind of their mindset. It's really they're really blind to their own hypocrisy and poor thinking in just so many ways. Makes me fume, and I'm not an American. Yeah, it's disappointing. Yeah, I mean, think about around where I live too. I would love to see them fix the streets. They've got so many potholes and stuff. Think of all the billions and billions of dollars that are just wasted, and all these people are just defrauding the system. And a lot of them shouldn't even be in this country. The Democrats flood the country with illegals and make you pay for it so that they can have more voters. And they want to act like they have the moral high side. Everything they're doing is about their political fortunes. That's all this is about. They don't want to work with Trump. They want to defund ICE and all that, because the more of these immigrants get deported, the more votes they lose. That's what it's all about. Anyone who doesn't see that is just so blind. Anyways, usually what I talk about in this channel is theology and things like that. If someone wants to change the subject and ask questions about Christianity or theology or God or what I've been talking about, go ahead. Maybe I'll pin the link. I can't stay here much longer, maybe half an hour longer. But if someone wants to have a chat, oops, what? Okay. Hmm. All right, transitioning and pivoting. The link is pinned. I'm still kind of surprised at the response to my debates, my theological debates. I don't know if Objective Ethics is still in the chat, but I watched his debate with Mark Reed. I might do a response to it. I think it was a very interesting debate. I feel like maybe a critique of Objective Ethics' position on morality is warranted. Maybe we'll do that. I'm not sure. It seems like maybe Objective Ethics has left. That's fine. But he did have a debate against Mark Reed on the Raging Tomato YouTube channel, and it was interesting. So maybe we'll talk about that. But as far as my own debates and things like that, I have recently, like as I usually did, gone on other people's channels, Christian channels, people teaching doctrines with which I disagree. And, they will basically run the show, which is fine. I do the same thing. They will dominate the conversation. And I will say, you're invited to my channel to have a discussion. But I don't know. I think some people like to hide on their own channels. I'm not going to name names right now. I could, but maybe I'm not sure what's going on. It may not necessarily be that they are hiding, so I don't want to just call them out like that. But I did invite, over the last week or so. I've been on Trinitarian channels, a couple of them, arguing against the Trinity, showing how it just doesn't make sense, even from Scripture or whatever they want, whatever basis they want to use. What is the gospel of salvation? Again, the same old stuff. Jesus Christ was a divine sacrifice for the sins of mankind. All you have to do is believe that, and God covered. Jesus' blood covers the rest. Things like that. Go on their channels, argue, explain how it doesn't make sense, explain how it's unjust for God to operate that way, to judge unrighteous people as righteous, and to condemn Christ as a sin offering of some sort, even though he was sinless. These things just don't make sense, and I challenge them. You can come on my channel and discuss these things with me, but I rarely ever see them show up. Actually, pretty much never. But I try to offer up opportunities, and if no one wants to join or ask questions or have a conversation, then that's fine. I've basically spoken the things that I want to speak, and I can shut down the stream at any time. But if anyone doesn't have any questions or wants to, basically engage on Christian theology, salvation, and things like that, I'm fine. I was kind of hoping that someone would, when I had the debate with Charles Jennings of the Layman's Seminary, I was kind of hoping some of these other people with whom I've interacted on YouTube, some of these bigger names, kind of the same people you see on those channels, would reach out and ask to debate about the apostleship of Paul, and have that discussion, have that debate. So far, no one has challenged me in any way. No one has. I had a debate about the deity of Christ with Praise I Am on Standing for Truth, and I had a debate about the gospel of salvation on Standing Truth. And I know that a lot of these people watched that channel, probably saw the debate, heard what I had to say. I actually did think that some at least one or maybe a couple of them would reach out and say, "Hey, I heard what you said. I want to have a conversation about that." So I could have invited them on my channel. We could have set up a debate, could have set up something. Not a single person. Well, I can't say a single, I guess there's been a couple random YouTube profile people out there. But I'm talking about, some of these more, these people I've been talking to over the years about these subjects, or some of these other more influential, well-known people. Basically, I'll be pro Paul against you. Your stance is cray. It's really not cray, Mike. It's really not. Like, just the idea of Paul being given authority, it's just so clear to me now. Like, it was never part of the original design of Christianity. The only reason Christians feel like they have to take Paul seriously is because the Catholic Church, centuries after Christ, put his epistles in a book they called the Bible. And the Bible became the basis of Christianity as opposed to the teachings of Christ. And most Christians just can't wrap their minds around the fact that the Bible is not the basis of the Christian religion. The teachings of Christ are the sole authority. Now, there's nothing wrong with having a book. But if I can see your side and you can't see mine, well, to be honest, I feel like I do see your side, Mike. I feel like you need to reassess why it is you feel like you need to even pay attention to Paul at all. Like, I'm guessing, now I can't be absolutely certain. I don't know if you were always a lifelong Christian. I think you said you converted at some point, if I remember your story correctly. Either way, however you came into Christianity, you probably were convinced that Paul was important because it was how it was presented to you. Because Paul is in the Bible, and therefore you have to like take his writing seriously. But that is absolutely a tradition that developed centuries after Christ, and it was not something that Christ commissioned himself. So I would just encourage you, Mike, to kind of basically assess this. Think about it. Why do I care what Paul has to say at all? Is it because he's inherently a part of the Christian religion, and that's what Christ wants me to do, or Christ intended? Or is it because, there was a tradition that developed, and that's the tradition that was presented to me, and that's why I accepted it? Once you realize that your Christians were never really supposed to have to care at all what Paul even said at all, then you really stop feeling the need to defend Paul and his epistles and his writings, because that is just a straight up fact that, in my opinion, it's a fact that when you really do investigate the origins of Christianity, Paul's Hebrews led me to Torah observance. So I see all his other writings, though later we see Hebrews probably not Paul. Right. The problem is, Mike, there's almost no chance that Paul even wrote Hebrews. Okay, so maybe what you can do is just be Jesus plus Hebrews. But I would recommend against that because we don't even know who wrote Hebrews. Second of all, why do you need Hebrews to be Torah observant? Because Jesus Christ taught the Torah. So you don't need Hebrews to teach you that. Another thing that I would say to you is that Hebrews has a whole bunch of other stuff that kind of negates the Torah. Okay? Well, Paul especially negates the Torah. So, but Hebrews, that is the epistle that is the most explicit in that Christ is a divine sacrifice for the sins of mankind. And now, if Christ is a divine sacrifice for the sins of mankind, then what is a sin? Hebrews led me to Paul, Galatians. Yeah, just there's a lot of problems with Hebrews, Mike. A lot of problems. So Hebrews led you down a dangerous path. All of those texts you mentioned right there are not part of the true Christian religion. Paul, his writings, Galatians, Romans, Acts, they're not actually authoritative Christian documents at all. And I've never heard anyone say that Hebrews was the inspiration to basically segue into all these other areas of Christianity and Torah observance. I'm going to try to investigate that, because when I read Hebrews, the ultimate message of Hebrews, in my opinion, is that Christ is in fact an atonement, a propitiatory sacrifice for the sins of mankind. Now it says a whole bunch of stuff, but that's one of the things it basically clearly outlines. And let me just finish this, Mike. If Christ is in fact the divine sacrifice for the sins of mankind, then Torah observance is useless. You know why? Because what is sin? It's breaking the Torah. Okay, but if Christ is a sacrifice for your sins, that means your sins are paid for by Christ. That means Torah observance is paid for you by Christ, so you actually don't have to do it logically. This is a huge logical problem in the whole atonement theory. For people who believe in both Torah observance and the atonement, it doesn't make sense, because you're saying that Christ paid the price for your lack of Torah obedience, and you're also saying you have to obey the Torah to be in right relationship with God. The whole point of Christ being an atonement is so that you don't have to obey the Torah, according to the atonement theory. Because if you fail to observe Torah, then Christ's blood pays for that penalty. So if Christ is in fact a propitiatory sin, then your Torah observance is basically just something you do voluntarily. Paul acts in Acts. Luke did not write Acts, Mike. That's what you kind of have to understand. What's up, Bowie? How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm getting a delay. Are you?
Are you really?
Yeah, I don't know what that's. I'm fantastic. I wanted to chime in a little bit, but I'm getting a major delay, and I don't know. Let me see if there's. Yeah, let me see if it's something on my end with YouTube.
Maybe
Okay.
sometimes it helps. Sometimes it helps if you drop out and then join back in. So let's try that.
Okay, let's try that. I think I'm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I think
leave the studio, then join back, and let's see if you have a better connection or something like that.
okay. I think I figured out what it is. Yeah.
Okay. Good. We're going to wait for our objective ethics to rejoin. If he's able to. I'm not really sure what's going on. All right, he's back. Let's see if we have a better connection. Can you hear me?
I can.
Is it better now? Is the connection?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
So it's because I have StreamYard downloaded on my PC. When I join a YouTube, I was watching on YouTube, it automatically opens up StreamYard for me. So it's running a dual stream essentially. So I have to remember to go back in and shut down YouTube at that point. The downside
Gotcha.
is I don't know. I guess I could track the comments. Yeah, I could track the comments through StreamYard then. Yeah, okay. So yeah, that definitely took care of it.
Good. So what was it you had on your mind?
Well, I started helping my wife with a project around the house. So when I started listening, you were talking about ICE and immigration. And then when I came back, you were talking about Paul and Hebrews. So I don't want to detract from the flow here. So I'm trying to just figure out where you're at, and then
It's whatever it's whatever you feel is important. I did mention at some point that I watched your debate against Mark Reed, and I was thinking about doing a review of it at some point along the line.
Yeah, I will say I was really disappointed in my own performance. I've been struggling with this really nasty cold flu thing, and I was just out of it. And during the day, I had put together a bunch of stuff specifically to deal with 2 points that I knew Mark was going to raise in the debate. One of them being the guillotine, the is-ought problem, and I had a couple other things I'd put together, and I was really pleased with what I had done. And for some reason, because I was so out of it, my damn OneDrive the cloud, it had shut
Mhm.
down on my PC. It just shut itself down and I didn't catch that. So nothing saved. And I'm used to having it just auto save. So I didn't manually save any of my work. So when I shut everything down to move it over to the table I wanted to do the debate from, and I opened everything back up, all I had was basically what I had put together previously. I didn't have any of the new stuff that I had done. And I was really frustrated with that because not only was I not prepared like I should have been because I had done all this work, but admittedly, it really took my focus away from the first half of the debate because I was just in the back of my mind, I was just so frustrated with the
Wow.
situation. Yeah, and that's my own
Yeah.
fault. It took me. That's really my own fault. It really detracted. There's, I could tell that I was like, okay, I got to get my focus. I got to just go with what I have and work with it, and
Yeah.
not. I can't. No use worrying about what I don't have anymore. I didn't try to make any of the arguments because trying to do it from memory, I didn't want to set myself up for failure that way and make myself look even worse. So I definitely had some disappointments in that debate, but overall, I'm really pleased with my initial opening statement. That was still there. My syllogism is really strong. All three of those arguments are strong. Mark didn't address any of them because I think he knew that they were actually, especially that second syllogism, because in order to refute that, he has to be able to refute one or more of the premises. And unfortunately, I did not. I should have really just hammered home on that on my own end, and I didn't. I let Mark kind of control the flow. So I was disappointed in that. I should have done a better job in that regard. But as far as the overall argument, I think I presented a strong case initially. I just didn't really hammer it home like I should have. But the case is there for anybody to watch it. And I also put that syllogism, all three of my opening arguments, in the chat in the comment section. So if anybody wants to go and review that, I don't know how long you stuck around after the debate, but a lot of people came in and actually supported my position, which blew me away because the objective moral view is such a minority position in the skeptic community. As I'm sure you know, most atheists and agnostics think that morality is subjective. And so when Sarah had initially asked me to do a couple hours, she said 2 to 3 hours of open panel. I told her, I said, I don't know if I want to do that to myself because I have a feeling I'm just going to be fielding a bunch of opposition from random places. And I just don't know if, with my illness and everything and not being a little under the weather, if I have the mental capacity to do that because it's extremely difficult. I've been, even on your channel before, I've been the only skeptic and had to have discussions. I remember one time there was not a formal debate or anything, but I was talking to like 5 or 6 of your Christian followers who were all trying to argue about the flood myth, and I was getting a different argument from every one of them all at the same time. Half the guys
Mhm.
were hydroplate theory proponents, half the guys were biblical literalists, just all these different random places. And it's so difficult to have a productive or linear discussion when you got so many people coming at you from so many different angles. So I thought that's what I was setting myself up for. But it turns out that, one, the cold medicine, by the time I actually got into the open panel, started wearing off. And so I was actually a little bit more clear headed than I was during the debate. Plus, I was past being upset about what I'd lost. I'd already gotten over it by then. So I performed much better in the open panel than I did in the debate itself, which I thought was really unexpected, but I was glad about. So it is what it is. I definitely could have done better, but I think overall it was a good learning experience. And even if I would have performed at my very best, I expected to lose that debate to Mark. He is such a strong debater. He has so much more experience than I do. And the format was tilted in his favor. They gave him the opening argument and the closing argument, the last word and the first word, which I felt was extremely unfair to me, having less experience, first of all. And if you get the first argument and the last word, you basically get to captivate the audience from beginning to end at that point. You know what I mean? So there were some things about it I wasn't really pleased with, but overall, it was a great learning experience.
Wow, that's horrible that you lost all your debate prep right before the debate. I mean, that's a nightmare. Like, honestly, like when I was preparing for my debates, I thought to myself, if I somehow lost my debate prep, I would be I would be shattered. Like, so the fact that you were able to go in there and still do the debate is really, it's pretty stunning in my opinion. that you were able to pull it off. Because I would have been like you said, it's not like debate can't happen, but it's just like I would never. I don't know if I'd be able to recover and have a solid performance after something like that happens. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, I was emotionally destroyed. I hate to admit it because I hate to sound so fragile, but I was literally like, because I had over 100 hours of prep into that debate. Now, the one advantage I did have is that the my opening remark, I had done that at the very beginning, so I still had that, fortunately, to build off of. But everything else was just gone, and specifically dealing with the is ought problem, because I get that all the time when I'm talking to subjective moralists or moral relativists, the different versions, um, and everybody brings up the is ought gap, but there's actually a way to get around the is ought problem. And Kant is really well known for having come up with the system. And David Carrier, I keep calling him David Carrier, Richard Carrier, just had a debate back in November on modern day debate. And he actually, even though he's an atheist, a well-known atheist and a mythicist, he is an objective moralist. He believes in objective morality. And in fact, I've cited his peer-reviewed work in my debate. And he had a whole perfectly structured argument as to how to overcome the is ought gap. In fact, I got a lot of my material from that. So there is a way to get around the is ought problem, but without having it written down in front of me and everything else that I lost, it just, my focus, it really screwed me up.
Yeah, I can absolutely imagine feeling that way based on my own debates and that I had on. Well, anyway, I think anyone, even if they've never debated, can kind of understand how devastating that would be. So, congratulations for sticking it out, and in my opinion, still doing pretty well. I'm not saying I agree with everything you said, but the fact that you were able to basically present a cohesive and a solid argument is pretty impressive. And I do intend to kind of go back and review it, and possibly even do a review of it on my channel, maybe with a little bit of critique of what you're saying, not in a trying to be basically in a disrespectful way, but just maybe as a way of highlight expressing my thoughts about it and whether it really holds up or not. I might do that
God.
at some point.
Oh, I'd encourage that. Absolutely. As you know, I always encourage pushback. I don't enjoy having people tell me that I'm wrong, of course. But at the same point in time, I really value the experience because it causes me to think critically about the things I'm asserting and the things that I believe. And I think this is really important. One of the problems I have with strong political or strong religious views or whatever is that people tend to lose their ability or their willingness to think critically. And I see this happen all the time. And I think that's really dangerous and unproductive, and it causes self-harm, in my opinion, because people start repeating talking points that they just have not thought out, or they don't allow themselves to access current or updated information, which may have a
Mm-hmm.
serious impact on their beliefs. And I did a short video, just one of my shorts on my channel, about what I called collective ignorance. And it's true that we tend to want to surround ourselves with people that we agree with, which seems like a natural thing, of course. The problem is that we start just parroting each other's the similar talking points, and nobody's encouraged to, in fact, we're actively discouraged to think critically or to question things. Schopenhauer talked about this. He talked about how once you're inside of a group, criticizing the beliefs of the group is highly discouraged, and people are afraid to do it. And it's not because that they're afraid that their actual ideas are going to get attacked. What they're afraid of is the fact that they're going against the group itself. It's this group mentality. And so this is really true. And I think that that's dangerous. So I encourage people to push back on my ideas. I prefer people to be respectful about it. But at the same time, I have a pretty thick skin, so people can come at me. As you've seen, I've been attacked pretty viciously, frankly, in some of the streams we've done together by some of the Christians in your channel, and I take it all in good faith. You know what I mean? I don't take it personally and stuff like that.
Well, good. Yeah. So, that's good. That's a good mindset. I will possibly do that again. If it was one of those things where I was doing a YouTube show every day, I would definitely do it. but I have to kind of budget my time, and sometimes like by the time I think about doing something, and then like it's 2 weeks later, and it's like something else has kind of already replaced it as something I want to do. But your debate is review worthy, and I will possibly do it at some point, and you know, maybe give some thoughts on it. I can possibly just give some thoughts on it at a time in the future. Before I do that, I do want to kind of review what you have to say a little bit more. So I don't want to say anything right now. I want to be sure I fully understand and have comprehended your arguments. So I'm not going to say anything right now, but I'm going to go back and like look at the debate, review it, and make sure I understand what it is I want to say about it fully.
Yeah, I think that's appreciated, because then your critique and your comments, which I would consider and really enjoy hearing because I value your opinion. Um, yeah, I think it'll be very beneficial that I have it written down in the comments, the opening argument, the three main arguments that I made. That I have two syllogisms and what is just basically a phrase, or however you want to say it. But yeah, that way you don't have to just listen, but you can actually read it for yourself. You can go over it line by line, look at each of the premises, how they lead to each conclusion, and then the next premises is built off that first conclusion, so on and so forth. And it gives you a chance to really comprehend what it is the argument that I'm making, because I can make the argument from three different positions. There's the position from evolution, there's the position from the normative reasoning claim, and the normative ought, if you will, and there's also the position from logic. So I've got three different ways of articulating the argument.
Interesting. Looking in the comment section, we got Mike here. Says the man who eats Jesus every Sunday, listening to men who drink blood. Mike, I think we're not Catholics, by the way. Neither Objective X nor I is a Catholic. So I don't know what I don't know what you're talking about. Mike has a really big problem with the the sacrament of the Eucharist, because he doesn't like how it's cannibalism. But Mike, you don't have to worry about that with us. We're not into that here. So sorry. What's wrong with subjective morality if divine in all of us? Um, hmm.
That is an interesting comment. I'd like that to get fleshed out a little bit more. I'm a little bit. I mean, I could tell you all kinds of problems with subjective morality, both from the fact that I don't think it's true, which I make arguments for that all the time. But the other issue is the divine, because when from the religious aspect, you don't have objective morality. You've got subjective morality. It's called divine command theory, and I do see problems with that, because once you get into the actual commands, it goes against what we would say in virtue is like things like justice and fairness and stuff, love, all the things that we normally in normal life would consider to be ethical or moral. That's my biggest argument against the religions, is when it gets down to the moral claims, I don't think that they're actually ethical or consistent with what they even say. I mean, if you look at Paul's, I used what is that, First Corinthians chapter 3, I think it is 13. Love is patient, love is kind. That's a very common, well-known set of verses there. I use that in my wedding vows, even though I'm not a religious person, because I think it's really beautifully written, and there's a lot to be said for that. However, if we think of what patience is and kindness is, and then we go back into the Old Testament and look at what the Yahweh God is doing, condemning all of humanity because of a piece of magic fruit, does not map onto kindness or patience or rational anything, in my opinion. But there's a lot of people being punished for other people's sins. Even in the Ten Commandments, it talks about punishing the children up to the third and fourth generation for the sins of the father. There's numerous stories about people getting punished for somebody else's sin in the Old Testament in particular. So this does not map onto what even is being written about patience, love, kindness, and all that. So there's an internal conflict as well as what we see in the world that we actually live in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, let me read. Let me see if he responded. I don't know what that's about. Yeah, there's a lot that could be said there. The story about Adam and Eve and the apple. There are people who obviously take Genesis to be symbolic of basically the fruits just representing basically general, like the idea is if God commands us to do something, it just represents rebellion against God. Uh, Now, there are the literalists who say that there's literal Adam and Eve in a literal garden literally 6,000 years ago, and they literally got kicked out of the Garden of Eden and things like that. I'm not sure. I'm not saying they're necessarily wrong. I'm not saying that's the only viewpoint. In my opinion, the Genesis Garden of Eden story strikes me as being symbolic in many ways. So the idea of there being a state where basically men lived in harmony with God at some point in Earth's past. I think again, I can't. The problem with a lot of what I believe is people accuse me of just making things up. But let me just throw out there what I think is a possibility. And again, why would I believe something that's just a possibility? I can explain that, but what the whole Genesis narrative basically is trying to establish is that God created man. Okay. And again, I know atheists are not going to, or we've already kind of, violated what they believe, but God created man, put them in a situation where we were obedient, living in harmony with God. Then men did something that God told us not to do. And that basically spiraled out of control from there. So yeah, God, we live in a situation now where the tendency of man, as a result, I think, cultural conditioning largely, but also because perhaps of an inherent tendency, is to basically act in a way that is not in alignment with God. But Jesus' teachings represent the return to the source. So the problem in the Garden of Eden was that Adam and Eve basically sinned. They disobeyed God. And that is the impetus for all the trouble that mankind has experienced since then. God designed the universe so that when we disobey God, bad things will happen. If we do obey God, then good things will happen. So that's kind of like my summary of how I look at the Adam and Eve story.
Yeah, I think the terms good and bad, I do believe we can give them an objective standard or value system once we've established a particular criteria. So I oftentimes use this analogy when I talk about divine command theory, for example, is that um, we we could get so we make up chess, right? We invented the game of chess, for example.
Right, right.
And so that's subjective, right? Just like God makes up the rules, that's subjective. However, once you get an established and agreed upon system of rules, then you can make objectively good or bad moves, right? Like in a chess game, you can make a move and you can objectively look at that and say, "Oh, that was not a good move. I've opened up my king, or whatever it might be. I sacrificed my queen, et cetera, et cetera." So we can establish an objectivity to it. So we could say, okay, good would be following God's command. To use your analogy here, or what you're talking about, we could say that it would be good to follow God's commands or bad to not follow God's commands. But the good and bad needs to be an additional kind of a value system given to that supports that. If we're going to avoid the ought problem, why ought we follow these commands? We say it's good. What makes it good, right? I agree that we could come up with a standard if we agree that that's the principle that we're all playing with, but then we have to look at that principle and say, okay, how are we going to divide up good and bad? What makes it good? What's the value of this? What benefit is it? Is it just, I'm going to go to heaven if I do this? Because certainly that would be a value, right? You want to live forever in paradise, if that is a thing. I could see that being one of the motivators, as opposed, or maybe the motivator is just to avoid going to hell forever. I guess it could work both ways there. Or is it good because it improves my relationships with the people around me? You know what I mean? So you'd have to really dive into it and say what actually value. If we're going to say we can come up to an objective system, what are the values? How are we parsing all that out?
Yeah. That's why one of the things about God is all knowing and all wise. So if God tells us what's good, that really helps us figure out what that system should be. That's kind of how I would look at it. Like God designed the universe, so God knows everything there is to know about the universe. So if it is true that God can communicate to people, which obviously is something that would need to be established, then listening to God would be the best way to figure out what our system should be. So that's kind of how I would answer that.
The concern that I have, given my own moral system of moral realism, and that I base it on the inherent value that every single human being has equally, I see, and I do then build my moral system off the virtues. I do see problems with, if God commands something that's terrible, that we would otherwise deem as being terrible, like killing women and children, we are then command or forced or committed to saying, well, God commanded it, killing women and children must be good, at least in this instance. And at which point then, that, and I see that as being problematic. The other thing I see as being problematic is that if God, okay, so if we accept, I guess it's divine revelation would be the way to put it. And I don't normally, when I get into first of all, I don't usually argue the existence of God or not. As you know, I'm agnostic. I give it a 50-50. I do pick apart particular arguments as whether I think they're valid or not. So like the Kalam cosmological argument or tag or something like that, I might pick that apart, not because I care about whether God is real or not, but just because on the merit of the argument itself, right? But when it comes to the well, we're just going to accept it for what it is. Oh, divine revelation. So if I do accept for people's personal experiences out of respect for the individual, those experiences never have, and I doubt they ever will, move the needle for me. But I don't necessarily promote, if somebody says, hey, they feel the presence of Jesus or Buddha or whoever it is, I don't usually try to shoot that down or discredit them and saying, oh, it's just all hallucination, it's all happening in your brain. I think that that's quite possible, frankly, but I don't articulate that to people because I think it's disrespectful. I wouldn't want people to discount my own personal experiences. I've lived a pretty crazy life, and I've done some pretty wild things, and if I was telling somebody something, I wouldn't want them to be like, oh, you're so full of shit. So I extend that same courtesy to other people. But it's dangerous if other people, if we're going to say, well, we believe that God can talk to people through this divine revelation, and people are telling us, oh, God told me we want to go invade this other country, or we want to, kill all the gays, or, what, any number of things that religious people have indeed tried to say or do over the years. And we have no way of saying, well, you know what, maybe God didn't tell you that. How do we know if that's actually coming from God? That's my other concern about that.
Yeah, you're right. Obviously, like a lot of people believe Muhammad, this is the false prophets. Even in the Bible, it talks about how there were, countless false prophets for every real prophet in the Old Testament. And again, I know an atheist would say they're all false prophets. I understand that. But the idea of there being false prophets is not, unreasonable because it's clearly something. But the fact is, there are frauds in every aspect of life, and just because there are people who do evil things like that doesn't negate the fact that it could be something real. And yeah, I understand the idea of well, the only thing, the criticism I would have is, in my opinion, if we're operating on the premise that God exists, that if we were to establish that and basically figure out who these people are who can communicate with God, ignoring the question of why God would only communicate to those people, but I have an interest in that as well. Yeah, I honestly think that if God is defined as the most all-knowing, all-wise creator of the universe, I'm not going to question anything that God says. If that God says doing something is the right thing to do, I mean, if I don't understand it, there's probably a good chance I may not, understand why it's the best thing to do. But I mean, would you really, if you really, let's put yourself in a situation where you can confirm, it's not a matter of faith, like that God is real. God is telling you to do something. It may seem unethical to you, but are you really going to question the God of the universe as to what's right and wrong? If God is saying this is the right thing to do it. But do you really think you could say no to the creator of the universe? Is that something you think would be a good idea?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really fair question. It's difficult. I want to be honest and fair and approach that hypothetical, honestly, because that's just respectful. And it does create an interesting thought experiment. It is difficult because it's a paradigm that I just don't hold, and so I really have to try and imagine. Okay, I got to first of all imagine this God is real. Then I've got to imagine this God is actually communicating to me in such a way that I would be able to know it's not just happening inside my own head, because we could talk ourselves into and out of horrific things as well as wonderful things. That's just the way the brain works. It's a very dangerous thing if our brain, it could cause us to think all kinds of crazy stuff. When we look at people who have mental conditions like antisocial personality disorder or schizophrenia or something like that, and some of the stuff that they are capable of doing is horrible. I mean, I've made the mistake of watching videos for about a week or two. I don't know what got my attention into it, but there's these real crime videos that, stories about real crimes that have happened, and they give you the background story. They show you the interrogations of the people and stuff like that, and it's insane and disturbing what human beings are capable of doing. And so many of these people are actually they do have mental disorders, and they're talking about having voices in their head. They'll have conversations in the interrogation room with nothing there, as if they're talking to somebody or something. It's really creepy stuff, And so knowing that the brain can convince us of things that are demonstrably false and not true, how would I even know? So I have to try and imagine your scenario where I know this God is real, and I know that this God's voice somehow is actually God's voice and not just something happening in my own head. And then I have to know or believe that, because you're a Christian, so I'm assuming that we're talking about the traditional Yahweh God and the Jesus character, and the traditional heaven and hell concept, which I don't know if you and I have ever really fleshed out heaven and hell, because one interesting thing is that so many believers have their own view of what heaven and hell even is. Every time I talk to a Christian, Muslim, or even Jew, Jews tend to have a more consistent view, actually, but internally amongst themselves. But Muslims and Christians, I get some really wild versions of what heaven and hell is. And Muslims are more consistent than Christians, but when it comes to Christians, they have every single individual person has their own idea. Are they going to meet their friends in heaven? Is heaven and hell permanent? I mean, there's just so many different things. So I'd have to really think, let's imagine the worst case scenario, or most extreme, that heaven and hell is a permanent place. If I disobey this God, I'm going to burn in hell forever. It's probably unrealistic, no matter how much I like to value character and my own system of ethics and virtues. It's probably pretty unrealistic that I'm going to willfully choose to go burn in hell forever, to be honest with you. That seems like a pretty crazy thing. I've heard atheists make the claim that if this God was real, I'd be asking it all kinds of questions and telling me he's a monster. I'd never worship this God. And I think it's big talk. I think if this God were real, and, I just don't see a lot of people. It's easy to say, but when somebody is holding a pew pew or whatever I can say on your channel to your head, you're probably going to do whatever they tell you to do for the most part. So realistically, probably I would. I mean, if I really thought all those things.
Yeah, and that's very honest, and I respect that, because I have actually heard atheist things about that, about, like, just like you said, if they actually met God, they would give God a piece of their mind about all the bad things he's done and continues to do. And I'm thinking about myself, imagine this puny little person standing before the creator of the universe talking about, obviously with the threat of eternal hellfire. But the idea is that whatever God is commanding you is actually the right thing to do. So there is that in the back of your mind. Now, I once heard Matt Dillahunty posed an interesting question to, and I'm sure he's probably not the first person to do it, because it's probably something a lot of atheists have thought of. Like, what if God appeared and said that slavery is moral? And it's like, it's a really interesting, almost logical paradox of well, for me, that does kind of create problems for me, because it is something that I obviously, and I guess most people rightly feel like is something that's unethical. But then you have God saying it's right. So it's like, huh. what do I do in that situation? Like, personally, for me, I'd have to accept that somehow, some way, slavery is the right thing to do. But the question I would have to ask at that in this logical thought experiment is, would God ever command something like that? You know, because the idea is that God will never command something that is unethical. We got Freddie in the chat. Good to see you, Freddie. Thank you. So the idea is God, but then, you know, the atheists obviously point to the Old Testament where God is like, slavery is okay. So God did command that, God did condone slavery according to that record, which is where I would probably come back and ask myself, like, did God really command that? Or is that just something that was written down and probably is not part of something that actually happened in history? But then you get into the question of, like, well, then which parts of the Bible can you trust and which ones can't you trust? So it's like, do you have to throw the whole thing out if you want to take out one part of it? You know, at that point, the entire thing becomes suspect, and it's this never-ending rabbit trail of logical, you know, pit holes and stuff. So that is pretty interesting to think about. You know, what if what if God appeared and said slavery is okay? Like, I don't know, like.
Well, I think for me, the issues that I have with the Bible, and I've studied this for many years, so I look at it from a different viewpoint. And I'm not a religious person, so I have a very different view. I'm not in the weeds looking at this thing. I'm looking at it from the outside. I also have an objective moral position that's based on equality, and then I base it on agency, and the every single human being has an equal a need for their freedom and well-being because they're agents, which instills a natural right, and that right gives them a reason. The reason leads us to ought, and I built an argument up from that. Well, probably my strongest argument for objective morality, to be honest with you, is because it deals specifically, gets around the is ought problem naturally by creating the ought into the argument itself, the normative claim. The other two arguments I think are good, but then you have to deal with the whole guillotine and stuff like that, which becomes a problem. The logical argument is also very good because I think that you can't violate the laws of logic. So those second two arguments are the strongest, the easiest because of the guillotine problem. But so for me, when I'm looking at the Bible as a whole document, it becomes internally inconsistent. So I think you have to discard something. If you can't have it both ways. Biblical literalists and people who want to promote the univocality, it's such an indefensible argument. It's so incoherent. You just have to embrace cognitive dissonance. If you're going to go from Genesis all the way to Revelation and say this is all one story written for, it's linear and it's univocal, it literally doesn't work. It's too contradictory. We talked about false prophets. We had a great conversation on my channel about Paul. I thought you did a great presentation. I really enjoyed having you. I'm looking forward to having you back. Yeah, so I just see, when you talk about like slavery, that gets a lot of traction on this in the skeptic community, and I think for good reason, because a lot of people do try to promote this univocality, and if you're going to do that, you've got to deal with the slavery issue is a big one, and that is problematic. The thing is, if so from the objective view, I cannot reconcile something like that. Now, if it's a might makes right situation where the creator of the universe, right, is going to condemn everybody to hell if you don't follow these rules, I think a lot of people are going to change their tune just because for self-preservation. And I hate to say that because it's unfortunate. And I think that's a major problem because I think that is what's happening. I think a lot of religious people do, even though religious people, especially in America, are not trying to own slaves, they're not taking it that far, but they are verbally supporting this. They're backing this up. They're committed to it because it's in the Bible, and they believe that that everything God does is good. And I think it introduces the Euthyphro dilemma, which is a good one that Plato, I believe, is the one who brought this up. Is it good because God commanded it, or does God only command what's good? And yet that's something that the religious people have to really wrestle with. Because it's just internally inconsistent. Slavery, the genocide of women and children, there's a lot of this stuff that gets brought up on a lot of atheist channels these days, and they are problems for biblical literalists.
Yeah, you're right, and that's why I get criticized a lot, and I have a hard time gaining traction with my views in Christianity because for me, if I have to choose between righteousness and what is actually objectively truly good and right, or biblical narratives, then unfortunately, the Bible comes second, in my opinion. So if I do find something in the Bible that I can basically, with great likelihood, establish is unethical, then my opinion is that the Bible it must be sacrificed. But a lot of Christians are unwilling to do that for a number of reasons, and I think their heart is in the right place. I think that a lot of the mindset of Christians is that if we admit that there's even a single error, then the whole edifice is going to come collapsing down, because at that point, nothing's trustworthy. Because if you question one thing, if you basically reject one thing, everything becomes subject to question, and it basically becomes no more morally absolute than what atheists, secular humanism, because you're basically just picking parts of the Bible that you like, or of God's word that you like, and tossing out things you don't like, and it becomes this thing where, well, everyone's just making up their own Christianity based on their own preferences, which is no different from any other worldview, even any morally relativistic worldview. So there's that. So yeah, it's an interesting thing, but the point is, the whole premise is that we're dealing with the Word of God here, and if we can establish that something isn't the Word of God, then God doesn't fall; the corruption does. So, in my opinion, if we do find corruption in the record that we have, whether the Bible specifically, God wants us to do that. God would prefer that the record be corrected rather than trying to defend something and obviously the corruption is going to come from human influences. So, well, supposedly. So in my opinion, I think a lot of these secular scholars, when they went into especially in the last century or two or so, and they analyzed the Bible and they found these places of likely, basically, manipulation, I think a lot of them had it in their minds that they were going to overthrow Christianity. And I think that was part of their intent. And it's not that they didn't find something that was true, but they were able to basically, what they wanted to do was overthrow the entire building. And what I'm thinking to myself is, what if what they've done is actually discovered the corruption that, once removed, will basically reveal the pristine truth that was always being covered up. So we don't have to defend things like slavery. We don't have to defend these parts of the Bible that strike us as being dubious, because they shouldn't have been there. This is a solution that Christians have been looking to, and strangely enough, it was brought to us by the very people who wanted to overthrow Christianity. Not all of them wanted to overthrow Christianity. I'm sure some of them were just trying to analyze the Bible objectively. But I do know a lot of these secular scholars have an animosity towards Christianity, and in my opinion, what they're actually kind of doing is saving Christianity. Let me before you respond, let me ask this: what reason do we have to think that any of it is the Word of God, especially considering that it exists today without errors? You think God would just correct errors or leave them out?
With errors, with errors, not without errors. With errors.
I'm sorry. Yeah, it exists today with errors. This is such a good question. I could probably, let me just try to answer it quickly, because I don't want to be disrespectful to OE. I want to address the last part first, and then go back.
This is just real quick. This is your show. I'm a guest in your house, so take as much time as you want. Whatever, absolutely. Don't worry about me. I'm just here to help build some content and interact. But take as much time as you want.
Yeah, the one thing is though, it's getting close to the time where I have to shut down just because of my schedule, and I have to go to sleep, and I do have to wake up early tomorrow, so I'm getting kind of tired. But so I don't want to take too long. I want to give Objective Ethics some time to say some more things. But you think God would just correct errors or leave them out? Well, here's the thing. This goes back to, why does God let bad things happen at all? Which is worse? Manipulating words in a text, or literally murdering someone, or violating women, things like that. These are all things God allows. So if we're just going to say, why doesn't God, basically you're going back to the question of, why does God allow people to do bad things? And my response always goes back to, in my theological system, and I know there are Christians who disagree with me, God has actually given humanity true libertarian free will. And that includes the capacity to manipulate religious texts in a way that will be preserved and deceive countless future generations, which, as horrible as that is. And so when we're on this earth, God, let's say there's a prophet 2,000, 3,000 years ago. God speaks through this prophet. His followers dutifully write down his words, put it in the book, send the book out to the masses. At that point, the scribes, the lying hand of the scribes, are free to manipulate things. And we are humans in this physical domain. That's just our free will. And God can send more prophets, which I would argue is exactly what Jesus was. I think there is evidence, there's reason to believe that Jesus taught exactly what I'm teaching. When you look at some of the things he said about, it looks as if Jesus is correcting portions of the Old Testament and probably indicating that there is a corruption. Even in Jeremiah, you talk about that verse in Jeremiah 7 where it talks about the lying hand of the scribes and things like that. I hear you, but God allowing errors in the Bible is like putting secret chicks. Well, it wasn't God. But God allowing errors in the Bible is like putting secret chicks in the Constitution that are designed to punish people. It seems I think that the problem, Andy, is that you're and I'm trying to. I respect you, and I feel like I respect that you're earnest. I feel like you're someone who comes at things with an earnest willingness to, like, you have your belief, but at the same time you're open to hearing what others have to say. So I'm God is, God allowing errors in the Bible. God doesn't want that to happen. I mean, that's just something that people do in their wickedness and corruption. And the Bible is just a writing, like any other text. It could be manipulated by humans who wish to do so. And for the only way God could prevent that from happening is from literally, basically denying the free will of the people who want to do that, which I don't think God does. So the blame isn't on God and God's system, because the blame is on humans abusing the system that God has created and allowing us to have our own free will, and even do something as evil as manipulating a sacred text. It's not God's fault. It's the false prophets. It's the lying scribes. And the only solution that I can see for God to basically correct that error, aside from to basically prevent these errors from accumulating, these manipulations, is to deny humans their own free will to do this. But if you're going to deny them the free will to manipulate religious texts, then why not deny them the free will to harm each other in other ways? Because manipulating a religious text doesn't directly harm anyone, but murdering someone does, stealing from them does, victimizing them and other things do actually hurt people. So really, the only solution that I can see to for God to prevent this is denying humans free will, which I think would violate the whole reason for giving us free will in the first place. Right, but innocent people that want to follow God's word are being deceived, and God could correct it. Well, again, how could God correct it? Could he come down out of heaven and write a new book? You have to realize that the book the book itself is a creation of humanity. The revelation comes from God. But basically, humans are in control of what goes on this earth. The book, once it's in our hands, God, let's just say, obviously, let's say God, like I said, go back to that prophet 3,000 years ago. God speaks, the scribes write down what the prophet is speaking. At that point, once the book is written, what happens to it is not God's response, is not God's fault. That's on us. So God did his part. God revealed the truth through the prophet. Now you could criticize God and say, well, do it in a more obvious way. We shouldn't have to trust these people, speaking as if we can't verify that. Okay, that's another discussion. But if we're operating on the premise that God does operate through these prophets, which I have no problem thinking that's at least a method that God could use. We could say that there are better methods, but let's just say that this is one method God is using to speak to people. Once God reveals that to the prophet, God's done God's part. The text that comes as a result of it being written down, people can manipulate that, just like they can change the words in like a biography of somebody, or even a fiction text or whatever. I know the Bible is considered fiction by atheists, but what I'm trying to say is any text out there can be manipulated by anyone at any time. Just because it's like a religious text, would I say there's like a special magical protection that it can't be manipulated? No. People can use their free will to do that. God imposes himself over free will at times when for the greater good. No, I don't think God does. I know the Bible records some instances where that apparently happens, but what I'm trying to say to you is there's, as outside of those, again, the record, which we're already arguing perhaps has corruptions in it. God, the system is that God has allowed free will. Yes. Okay. Yes. He did just that for Moses. Right. So, I mean, so you're going to have to argue that every single time in history that somebody wanted to corrupt the books that became part of the Bible, God would have to swoop down and literally intervene, stop them in their free will and change their mind and not allow them to do that. But then again, if God isn't going to allow them to manipulate a religious text, why wouldn't God just stop them from doing any bad thing at all that is sinful, So if we take your argument to the extreme that God should just violate people's free will so they don't corrupt a religious text, I would at that point be asking, well, shoot, let's just stop people from doing bad things ever. Like, if God can eliminate that, then surely God can, or I would imagine God could stop all the other bad things people can do. Well, Moses and 1 million folks, but I mean, wait a minute. None of those million aged over 20 made it in. Nor Moses. Where'd it go? Okay, there it goes. God could just come down right now and set the record straight once and for all. We have cameras now. He stopped Pharaoh. Why not stop this? This seems equally important. All right, this is a good one. Here's another question of why doesn't God just appear in the clouds like a giant, Thor type figure and just scream down to mankind like, here I am, believe in me and do what I say. And that would set the record straight and everyone would believe in God. Like, I think we're thinking about an anthropomorphized type of God. Like there actually is a man up there in space, like looking down. Like, I think that God does, when you conceive of God accurately, which is basically an incomprehensible intelligence that is the source of all creation and which encompasses all of reality, I could argue that the universe itself is part of God, and when we look into the universe, we are seeing God. We just don't recognize it as such. Yeah, like a huge Michelin Man, exactly. I think that's what a lot of atheists want. They want a giant Michelin Man floating up in the clouds, screaming down that, stop disobeying me, start believing in me, I'm right here, can't you see me? Like, that's kind of the caricature of God that atheists want people to take pictures of and say, here's God. But I think that God is much greater than that. He's not like a real man with a physical body floating up in heavens and in sky somewhere. I'm going to read a few more and then give an objective ethicist a chance to speak because he hasn't spoken in a while. I converted to Christianity, slightly embarrassed to say it. Why would you be embarrassed about that? Yeah. No, this is a Christian channel, Dux. I'm just kind of engaging with atheistic arguments. Are you a Christian or are you? It seems to me like you just said you converted to. Like, are you saying you are no longer a Christian, or you are still a Christian? Like you converted to Christianity some time ago and then stopped being a Christian? Oh, you're a Christian and a skeptic? Am I understanding you correctly? Both. So you said both here. We are to be drawn to him by a simple. Well, I'm going to read this last comment by Annie, then I'm going to let Objective Ethics speak his mind. Well, I just think there should be good reasons to reject God having a physical appearing form. The Bible shows God proving himself to several people physically. Yeah, that's an interesting discussion to have. You're right. No, that's I'm not joking. That's actually not a bad point, but I feel like I've already kind of addressed it. Objective X, what do you have to say?
Well, there is a lot to unpack there, and I want to be respectful of your time too. So, first of all, just let me just really quickly just give a shout out to Dux. It was so great to see you at the debate last night, and also again join my live chat today. I thought you did a great job of posing some tough questions to my guest, and you were very polite and respectful. But you're very intelligent, so you know the tough questions to ask. I thought you did a great job. And that is an interesting comment. I'd actually like to have you flesh that out more as far as your conversion and both. That's kind of interesting. Is from what you were talking about, I would like to couch the free will conversation. And in fact, I think I mentioned this before, but definitely you and I talked about having you come back on my channel as a guest. And I think I'd like to talk about that topic. We might do other things as well, but libertarian free will, to me personally, I think is indefensible once you really break down the argument. Now, you may have an argument for it that I haven't heard, because I don't think I have heard your argument in defense of that. I've heard you make that claim. And I know there are a lot of people who do think we have free will. I do not support hard determinism. I'm actually believe in soft determinism, but free will is indefensible in my opinion. I'd love to have that conversation with you, because I'd be curious as to how epistemically you come to that conclusion. As far as just kind of touching on what we were talking about before, I think that one of the things I find interesting, having studied world religions in school and been exposed to different formal organized theories on all this stuff and philosophies and ethics in particular, when it comes to which parts of the Bible should we discard or accept, my advice to people would be to basically do some research and study some of these other religions, because what you will find when you do that is there actually is a core set of ethics and values that's fairly consistent within all religions. Okay. And this is one of the reasons I think that support objective morality, to be honest with you, is because I think man creates these religions. I don't think that any gods have dictated these religions. I think they're all, whether you believe in God or not, is irrelevant. I think it's pretty obvious that people come up with these religions themselves, right? They're inventions of people. And so if you look at the moral systems of all these different religions, you're going to get some consistent morals spread throughout. And I know there are some Christians or some religious people who say that, yeah, that's because God wrote these morals on people's hearts. Fine. However you want to justify it, I don't care. As long as you could step back and see where, like not stealing, right? Not murdering, this kind of stuff. You're going to see this in every single religion. Another thing you're going to see in every religion is reciprocity, the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. You're going to see that consistently throughout. So once you get yourself basically a list of, okay, this rule, this ethical principle or moral principle is consistent throughout all these different cultures, all these different religions. Let's go ahead and bookmark that one. And you start getting a list. And then anything that is exclusive to the particular religion or limited among a handful of religions, you set that aside. and compare your lists at that point. And I think that's a really good starting point for what you keep and what you toss out, to be honest with you. That could be a really good approach. And the other thing you said, well, actually, I think I'll leave it at that and see what you think about all that.
Yeah, I mean, with ethical system, and by the way, Thomas has joined us, so you will have a chance to speak as well in a little bit, Thomas. Well, there was the comment about free will. We can have that discussion later, absolutely. So I guess I'll just leave that for another time. As far as like, humans making up things and, just culture over time converging on a similar sets of moral principles. Sure, it's possible that I've many times argued that pagan philosophers, some of them did actually end up coming with ethical systems that are very close to what Christianity taught. But a lot of secular philosophers also came up with, wildly divergent things. I think is when we look at Darwinism, for instance, we see that according to Darwin, the purpose, basically, the system of nature boils down to survival of the fittest, which I would argue, when you look at social Darwinism, boils down to, eliminate the weaker members of society, and basically kind of gets into a eugenics line of thought, things like that, which, if you're eliminating weaker members of society, that's not loving towards those people. So Jesus taught us to love the people so there's things like that. But and it's undeniable that even when you look at Islam, I think Muhammad was a false prophet, but when you read the Quran, he definitely said some things that I think are true. And I can't argue that it's because I think God gave him those ideas. It's just because he said them, and they happen to be things that I believe are true. What I would say to that is, yes, people are going to be able to come to some element of the truth on their own, but they can't know it's true. At kind of like an ontological level. They can kind of arrive at that level. They can arrive at that conclusion, but it's more like, we think this is good. Whereas if God reveals something to us, then because God is the creator of the universe, we can be certain that it is the greatest good. It is what is objectively the most good, because it is coming from us to the source of the creator of what is good. And then the only question is, it goes to your point of, well, what makes us think that God is actually communicating to these people? And I think that it's unfair to say that we can say with certainty that these people were basically just making things up. There are people today who I think I can believe that they have had some experiences where they might have, experienced a higher power, and I'm willing to listen to those people. Now, as I've said before on my channel, could these people be having a mental health breakdown? Sure. Could they just be insane? Sure. Could they just be lying to gain fame and profit? Sure. But I do believe that there is a genuine capacity of humans to basically be in touch with this higher power, this higher truth. And I don't think it's something that people just make up. I think that there are people in the past who are prophets. There are real prophets. And it makes sense to me that if God created humanity, God will be able to communicate to us in this way. So I'll kind of just leave it there for now. Thomas, you've been here. So what I'll do, now hold on, before you speak, Thomas, I did say about what's strange is, Thomas, you always join right at the very end. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow you, first of all, to kind of respond. Then I'm going to allow objective ethics to respond. And then what I'm going to do is begin the process of showing on the stream, which is everyone's final statements, and then I'll close on the stream. So let's do it that way. Thomas,
okay.
You take a few minutes to basically see everything that's on your mind based on the conversation you heard, and then we'll throw it back to objective ethics. He'll have as much time as he wants, and then we'll begin the closing process. So go ahead, Thomas.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess when he says, free will is indefensible, I'd be interested to know to what extent he means by that. In regards to libertarian free will, in regards to kind of like the Molinistic idea of middle knowledge, semi-Pelagianism. I would agree. I do think that position is indefensible. But I would say, I would say, regardless of that, we do have free will correspondent with predestination, in the sense that God, being the supreme good, ultimately has an eternal law which determines the ends and determines the means, whereas man has a rational appetite that allows a person to either seek the good or seek temporal goods. So again, I don't know. I don't want to straw man your position. But that's kind of how I would see it, on that. As for the second point, I mean, I think I would generally agree with A's for the most part, that in many other religions, we see certain norms and principles of natural law that are considered adverse to what is observable in the world. Like, for example, in Mormonism, the idea, I know they don't teach this anymore, but the idea for many years that polygamy was acceptable. That's something that in the natural world we generally poo poo. In fact, there are studies that show children that are in polygamous households tend to struggle with more mental health issues, or in Islam, when it comes to the age of consent. That's another thing that we naturally look at, that appears to be contrary to natural reason, whereas in Christianity, at least when it comes to the teachings of Jesus Christ, whether you view Jesus Christ as the Messiah or the Son of God or not, it's very difficult, at least in my opinion, to argue that there are things that Jesus Christ taught that were contrary to natural reason or natural law, or I suppose if you don't believe in natural law, then certain norms that are considered acceptable in the world today. I mean, the only thing I could maybe think of is maybe Christ's view on divorce. Maybe in today's society, some people might say, well, there's, divorce. Maybe he's being a little rigid on divorce. But even then, most people today wouldn't say that divorce is a positive. Most people would still say that divorce is a net negative. So I suppose in that regard, you could say that Christ's views weren't contrary to natural reason in that regard. But that's just how I would respond to that.
Yeah, that's actually really good points, and I just want to say really quick, it's always nice to see you, Thomas. Um, I've spoken to you a few times. I don't know if I think a couple times you've been in a room with me, and there's been a bunch of other people, so it's tough to weed out whose arguments are what. Being that I'm an agnostic and you're a theist, there's probably a lot of things we would disagree on, at least in principle. But I do think that according to what I can recall, you've always been very civil and respectful, which I do value that tremendously. And I'm sure you would say the same about me as well, because I try very hard to do that. So I really appreciate your input here. And I would really welcome you to join that conversation. I don't know if you check out my channel ever or whatever, but I do have plan on having A's come discuss free will. I'd love you to be a part of that. I open up those panels for open discussion. It's every Sunday, 4 p.m. So yeah, the free will, it's libertarian free will is what I'm talking about. But I think that from what you just said, if you and I sat down and hammered out the definitions, right? Because the devil's in the details, as they say. So if we hammered out the definitions of what we mean by free will and determinism, etc., we may find, just based on what you said, we may find more agreement than disagreement there. Even though we be coming from two fundamentally different places as far as what the source of all this is, just based on the principles themselves. So that would be an interesting conversation. I do hope that you follow up and do check out that video when I have A's come on and are able to join us. I don't know what your schedule on Sunday afternoons is. It's 4 p.m. Eastern is when I host those, but we tend to go for a few hours. So, and anyway, so I'll just, one comment I'd like to make before I turn it back to A's is I think that Dux had made a comment quite a bit ways up in the chat now, but something about atheism hatred is what caused him to convert to evangelicalism. And I agree, even though, and agnosticism is a pretty unusual position. Most people consider themselves to be either atheist or agnostic atheist. So agnosticism itself is fairly unusual, but I would throw agnostics in the same boat. It's just as atheists in the sense that we're all skeptics. And because at the end of the day, I think humans will human, so to speak, I don't think that being a skeptic has proven to be any more ethically viable per se than being a theist, despite all the terrible things that atheists and agnostics would say about religious people and the religious harm that's been done, which there certainly has been a lot of harm done in the name of religion, like it or not. That's just historical. But I don't think the atheists have come up with a better solution. Secular humanism, I do believe, is a better solution in principle in a lot of ways, because it promotes more of an egalitarian kind of concept, but it's not practiced by atheists in general. They tend to click up and then have their own discriminations against people. You'll find a lot of this, it shows itself in politics. There's been many studies done, and you can see this peer-reviewed. Pew Research does a great study on this, but I think last time I looked, it's over 80% of atheists identify as the far left or on the left. I don't know if they call it far left, but on the left, whereas the majority of theists will be, the slight majority of theists will be either on the right, and then the significant majority will either be in the middle right leaning or again on the right. And so you see this tendency that maps onto people's religious worldview that happens to map onto political views. And what the people on the left are doing, I'm an independent centrist. I can't stand the left or the right. I think both of these sides are driven by agendas. I think it's the same thing. Problems I see with religious beliefs is I see a lot of cognitive dissonance. I see a lot of groupthink, and I think that's very dangerous, as I mentioned before. I don't know if you're here for that. So, yeah, I don't blame ducks for seeing a lot of hatred coming from atheists. You know, I think there's a lot of disrespect. I don't particularly like it. I never engage in the type of rhetoric of sky daddy, flying spaghetti monster, that kind of stuff. I think that's just unnecessarily disrespectful, and I think it's meant to attack people. I also don't like the idea, as I mentioned before, of discounting people's personal experiences. If somebody says that their belief in Jesus or God or whoever helped them to get off of drugs and alcohol, I feel it's incredibly irresponsible to try and tell that person that God does not exist or that God doesn't give them strength to do that. I'd prefer people to recognize they have that strength within themselves, because I personally believe that's where that strength does ultimately come from. But I'm not going to talk people out of that. You know, I just feel like that's just foolish to even try and do that. So I don't actively try to deconvert people. So I don't blame ducks for saying that. I'm not going to defend skeptics and say they have any moral high ground over the theists, despite all the other stuff that we were talking about, defending slavery and whatever else that the theist ends up being committed to. So I'll just leave it, I guess, at that, and then turn it over to A's.
Yeah, a lot of man, so much that we could talk about. I guess let's do it this way. I said we would begin the shutdown process. Ace and Thomas, take 1 minute to respond in any way you feel appropriate, and then I will, just because I have thoughts, but I feel like I'll talk to objective ethics again, and we can. These are all things that are going to be probably part of your conversations at some point. So, Thomas, just maybe if you want to take a minute, and then we'll begin the shutdown process.
Yes, well, I appreciate objective ethics kind words. I will definitely look into see what my schedule is this Sunday. I can't promise I'll be there, but I will attempt to be there. And since you extended the invitation to me, I'll extend the invitation to you. I am now doing live streams on my channel every Friday. We kind of have a different topic every week. Last week was about sola scriptura. This week is going to be against once saved, always saved. It's going to be an open panel presentation, so anybody's invited. If you're open Friday night, feel free to join. I know a lot of people are doing other things on Friday nights. People like to party and whatnot, but if you have some time, it's at 9 p.m. Eastern. And again, I appreciate you having me on, A's.
Thank you for being here, Thomas. I guess if you want to use that as your final word, then go ahead. But otherwise, yeah, let's. I guess, I don't. I mean, how about we do it this way? If you want to use that as your final word, Thomas, fine. If not, take another minute, and then we'll go to
Yeah,
objective ethics.
I think that'll be my final word.
All right. Well, I'm glad you were here, and everyone subscribe to Eastern Thomas channel, and he's looking for some participants. So go ahead and do that. Thank you,
Thank
Thomas.
you. Bye.
All right, later. Before you, how about this objective ethics? Say any final words, and then I want to talk to you about future conversations before you drop out. So just be aware of that. But yeah, any final words?
Yeah, just let me just shamelessly plug my own channel. It's at Objective Ethics, and I also do a live stream every Sunday, 4 p.m. Eastern. I oftentimes will try to schedule a guest just because it gives me some content to start with. But I always open up the panel for people to join. We've been having some really good open panels these last few weeks. In fact, A's was part of one of my better ones here recently, and really appreciated that he brought people to the channel. So please do subscribe to my channel. I always welcome people to give pushback if you see any of my ideas that you are critical of or want more details of. I welcome the pushback personally. I do ask everybody to be respectful. And I do work Friday nights, unfortunately. So I'm on the West Coast. That would be 6 p.m. That's right in the middle of when I'm at work. So I will check out Eastern Thomas's channel, though, and maybe watch videos, not live, but I'll catch up and see what some of the content that he's put out there. And do encourage him to subscribe to my channel as well. And I do appreciate the support. So I'll leave that as my final, and then Ace, whatever you have for me.
Yeah, as far as future conversations, maybe at some point, you and I could set something up, kind of like you invited me on your channel. Maybe we can set something up where we do just have a conversation about your ideas about objective ethics and basically their foundation in and how you deal with that, the arguments, and basically it'll be like allow you to have like the first 10 to 15 minutes to present your views, then maybe go into you and I kind of going back and forth, and then maybe opening it up. Something like that is kind of what I'm thinking about. Trying to do that. Would you be open to doing that sometime in the near future?
Oh, absolutely. Now that I've had my debate, I'm not keeping anything secret anymore, because my strongest argument is that second syllogism, the normative, the argument from reason. And so I definitely would like to present that as much as possible and get people's opinions on it. So I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, cool. So we can try and set that up. Also, as far as appearing on your channel again, absolutely, I'm open to that. I know we talking about the ethics of Christianity and whether secular humanism or other viewpoints are superior. I'm absolutely willing to do that at some point. And also, some of these other philosophical topics about free will or basically any of the other things we've discussed in the past, we can set up a kind of a focused conversation. So these are things I just want, we can kind of, put out there on the radar as possibilities. So, but yeah, as for right now, I'm just gonna basically close things out. So thank you for being here, Bowie.
Always a pleasure, brother. Always a pleasure. I don't know.
Right.
I don't have a leave studio option for some. Do I? You just want to kick me out, or do I leave myself?
Yeah, I'll boot you.
All right.
Yep. All right. Until next time. Thank you. All right, and there we have it. Yeah, I think that the conversation speaks for itself. I encourage anyone who is watching now or in the replay to like and subscribe. Most of my channel these days is live discussions. I think I'm going to have to use the videos, the recorded videos, for more of the education purposes going forward. But I will also use kind of the same methodology going forward of having the discussions where I use the first 10, 15 minutes to kind of present some views and then allowing other people to join and also express themselves. On the same topics, basically all the important stuff. If you want to get into politics, that's fine. But whatever we're discussing, as long as people are able to do so respectfully and in a civil manner and calmly, which I know is, even for myself, is difficult at times, because these are things that get people worked up and passionate, and there's a reason for that. It's important. These are important things. And we see that passion, even though I disagree with a lot of what the people out there. It's not surprising that people get worked up about these things, because they strike so deeply to what gives us meaning in our life. So whatever we're discussing, we're discussing things where when people disagree, it's gonna feel uncomfortable, but we can't arrive or approach truth, assuming that some people have it right and some people have it wrong. At some point, those disagreements must be confronted, and that's never going to be a comfortable thing, but it's necessary for the progress of humanity. So, to the extent my channel is able to do that, I want to be part of that. Go to Eastern Thomist channel, go to Objective Ethics channel, subscribe to them, and as for my channel, continue to like, subscribe, and I hope to see you again. Until next time, God bless.